what has been striking, and I want to turn a little bit to what you've been writing about in your book, is we have now maybe close to a dozen, maybe a little more in members of Congress who have attempted to push for a ceasefire, haven't signed on to some of these censure votes that the House and Senate's taken. Bernie Sanders has been a little bit disappointing in terms of, to say the least, in terms of calling for a ceasefire. I think he called for a humanitarian pause. I'm not sure what that means. There obviously is something about the word has gone out. We don't want you saying the word ceasefire.
Right. He said the bombs from both sides should stop, but he won't say ceasefire. And you're like, well, what's the difference?
Well, why is it? I mean, it's obvious. The difference is obviously either the Biden administration has said this is an unhelpful term for us, or what? Because, one of the things that was sort of a coincidence, although I don't know that it, I think this is what AIPAC had in mind, is AIPAC has been basically off the past 2 cycles, at least, been on a very explicit sort of discipline campaign for potential dissenters in a situation like this in Congress. Tell us about it in the context of your book.
Yeah, it was really kind of surreal to go back over it, because I just did the recording for the audiobook over the last couple of weeks, and I hadn't looked at the book for 6 months before that, and to see it in the context of this war was an odd experience. But you're right. It really goes back to February of 2019, and it goes back to the election of the squad in general, but in particular Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib. And February 2019 is when Democratic Majority for Israel, DMFI, launches. And it was launched, I report in the book, with basically the support of AIPAC. Like, if you gave money to DMFI, then that would count kind of toward your dues, your credit to AIPAC. Because, depending on what kind of tier you are at AIPAC, you get different perks. At the AIPAC conference, you might get a private meeting with Schumer, or you get to meet Kevin McCarthy with a handful of other people who gave $1 million plus, and at $5 million is a different perk. 500. So if you gave money to DMFI, that would count towards AIPAC, because AIPAC was still doing grassroots. They hadn't gotten into the super PAC game yet, so they let DMFI do that in the 2020 cycle. But then in the 2022 cycle, AIPAC got into the game as well. And I write about how J Street, going into that cycle, raised about $2 to $3 million, and they thought DMFI would spend about $10 million, somewhere between 5 and 10, and that would be enough to make them competitive. You don't need to be 1-to-1, because the argument that DMFI and AIPAC are making is so unpopular. They need to spend overwhelmingly. They actually came up with a rough calculation that AIPAC needs to outspend the progressive opponent by about 10-to-1.
Wow.
But if it's like 2 or 3 or 4-to-1, then it's a clean fight. It's a fair fight. And so then AIPAC comes in with more than $30 million, just throwing over the apple cart, like completely changed the calculation. Because now they could go in, and I think they spent $7 million against Donna Edwards in Prince George's County, because she had cast a vote when she first got to office in 2009. That was not completely supportive of whatever Israel was doing in Gaza with that particular war, if you remember that one. And they've had it in for Donna Edwards ever since. So when she tried to come back, they just nuked her, spent millions against Summer Lee. Nida Alam, if you remember her, she was the first Muslim elected in North Carolina. Her friends were the ones who were killed in that very famous Chapel Hill hate crime, where 3 or 4 Muslim men were killed. And she decided to get into politics, and she was elected at Durham.
Jesus Christ, Ryan Grimm is terrible on video. He is horrific, and practice does not make him better at all. He's been doing the show on Breaking Points for a while. Excruciating to watch this guy. Like, he could make the most exciting thing sound like the worst, boringest shit. ever. But like I said, we had to play it because the title of this video is why progressive leaders are so terrified to say ceasefire. And it's going to swing back to that more directly when it gets back to Sam. So what I'm going to do is go to Twitter and I'm going to come back to this video. So Bernie has gone viral on Twitter and other social media, but not for a good reason. I'll start with Medea Benjamin, the leader or president of Cold Pink. She says, if you care about Palestinians, Bernie Sanders, you would call for a ceasefire. Now, you would think, oh, didn't you guys cover this? No, this is new. This is new. Before, it was a video where he was going in on the people who, his former staffers that asked him to call for a ceasefire. This is a new video because the pressure in the streets have been so great. You hear them complaining about all the protests on college campuses, calling it anti-Semitism, but they understand, they're projecting that, but they understand that those thousands of people that are marching are going to translate into votes or lack of votes. You can see the pivot by the administration because of the pressure they're feeling within their party too. And you see it in the video that I'm going to be showing you in just a second. It seemed to have stiffened some of the backbones of the NATO left on this specific issue only. But let's first listen to Bernie Sanders. He put this video out. Let's listen, and then I'll read the caption there because I think he may.
Congress must take action. The administration must take action. The world must take action. Today, 3 weeks after Hamas's barbaric attack against civilians in Israel, which began this war, many hundreds of thousands of innocent men, women, and children in Gaza are on the brink. Over the past 3 weeks, it is estimated that some 8,000 people in Gaza have been killed in bombings, including more than 3,000 children, and far more have been wounded. More than 1 million people in Gaza have been displaced from their homes, and some 670,000 are sheltering in UN installations where they are down to 1 liter of water per person per day. They lack sufficient food, water, medical supplies, or fuel. The hospitals and medical facilities there are in nightmarish conditions, with hundreds of babies in incubators and patients on life support at risk of death should the generators that sustain them run out of fuel. Corridors are lined with injured and displaced people, and overwhelmed doctors must turn patients away or operate without anesthesia or antibiotics. The humanitarian crisis is dire and getting worse by the minute. There must be a humanitarian pause now so that sufficient supplies, food, water, medicine, fuel, can reach the people of Gaza. If not,
So, humanitarian pause. So, things are so bad that you're saying, Bernie, it requires us, the war, to be put on pause. So, if it's a pause, that I would assume you mean you wanted to resume at a point. What are the points that need to be reached, the threshold, if there's more than one, that need to be reached for you to say, let's resume it? Bernie Sanders is a perfect example of why social Democrats, sock Dems, aren't the people that's going to lead anybody to any sort of promised land. Teaming up with people like this will only bring you heartache. Bernie Sanders is good on domestic policy and terrible on foreign policy. If you believe the strategy needs to be international, how do you strategize with sock Dems like Bernie Sanders, who are very weak on foreign policy? How do you do that? Let's let him finish his dribble, and I'll give a little more commentary. It's only a few more seconds here.
Thousands more will die needlessly. We cannot allow that to happen. A stop to the bombing is critical to save innocent lives and secure the safe return of hostages.
Just shameful. Like, I know what he has to say in front of the camera. He looks like a tormented man who knows he's full of shit, or it has to publicly be full of shit. He doesn't look like a man who speaks from a place of righteousness because you know you are 100% in line with humanity. He doesn't speak from that point. But let's go to some other reaction to this. And this is Means TV. Anti-ceasefire equals pro-genocide. We won't forget what spineless disappointment Bernie and many other progressives have been on this. And then you have Glenn Greenwald saying, it's fine, even good, to point out the actual humanitarian horrors enabled by bipartisan U.S. policy. But Bernie cheered those policies 3 weeks ago. And this pause he wants doesn't remotely change that. This is just cheap, conscious cleansing without real substance. Nick with the viral tweet. This scumbag can't even bring himself to say the words ceasefire. Bernie is disgusting. And I concur with all of those.